Andrew, in application development, I know people will be familiar with Waterfall, they'll be familiar with Scrum. What method is being used to create applications within Canvas?
One can use pretty much any method one wants, but the beauty of in Canvas is that because of the fact that the platform does so much and takes care of so much of the infrastructure and everything that's involved with a project, that quite often it's reduced to actually a very simple task involving the modeling of the business process and the implementation of that through a canvas. So in fact, quite often apps and projects become so simple that one almost doesn't need to resort to those potentially quite heavy systems of project management. One can actually do it in a very linear and quite simple fashion.
What is live wireframing?
So live wireframing involves effectively building what would traditionally be a mock-up, or just sort of almost more like a slideshow of an application, so that as you're going through and developing the requirements, you can see how it's going to look. So the advantage of this is that when you can see it, it can often help to then develop the ideas further, and one can actually get more specific about the final outcome of an app, rather than having to hold it all in one's head and imagine it as one's going along. Now, the really great thing about live wireframing within Canvas is that it's not just a mock-up or something fake that you're building. You are actually building the final application, and the simplest live wireframe is as deployable as any canvas out there because of the nature of the Canvas Cloud and the App Fabric.
Andrew, in a world of prototyping, live wireframing sounds like a very exciting concept. The ability to get applications built rapidly with a small team of people and failing fast if that's indeed what you do. But how does in Canvas help that?
There's something very key where traditionally an application will have been built by different people with very specific skill sets. So for instance, there'll be someone doing the front end logic, but then they'll also be working with someone who's working on the back end and the data sources. So what this means is it makes the project fragmented, and means that you have things that rely upon other things. And then if, for instance, there's a brief to the database engineer to build the data structures a certain way, then if later on in sort of a later stage of the project, it's discovered that actually things need to work differently, there's a whole interrupted process of trying to go back, trying to get those changed. Often it's not possible to get those changed, and one ends up really having to work around things to accommodate new features. So this is where in Canvas is so different, is it's one person in charge of everything. So even at the final stage, minutes before you're done with the canvas, a fairly fundamental change comes in. It's completely within your control power to change any given aspect, be it the data sources, be it the functionality, anything of an app. And this really makes it very fundamentally possible to perform these sorts of live wireframing prototyping exercises that then result in excellent output at the end.
The makeup of project teams.
In Canvas, and the way that it's been built and architected as a platform, means that very complex projects can be achieved potentially by a single person with a very specific and fairly fundamentally basic skill set. So what we're looking at is potentially someone who's an analyst. So they understand the business processes, and they can sit with the business users and internalize and model the function that is seeking to be performed by the app. But then even as they're doing that, they can effectively live wireframe the solution in Canvas. But then, thanks to the nature in Canvas, what they're doing there is building the actual application. So then with just the lightest knowledge about data sources, because they'll probably need to just know what a table is and a column is, they can then build the data structures as well, link and interact with the design elements, and publish them seamlessly to the App Fabric. So what it means is that the developers of apps can be really focused on the business need and the business requirements, rather than any sort of technical coding or anything like that. And of course, they don't have to worry about things like security, browser support, all of these things that the platform takes care of. Having said that, because of the potential to extend the platform through things like the Hyper plugin or interactions with external systems, if a project is quite complex, one can have a greater skill set and maybe more knowledge of things like Java, C#, .NET coding, or indeed SQL, these sorts of things, or whatever data source one is dealing with, because the platform has been designed to both support the simple way of doing things, but then to allow for more complex, more specific skill sets to be utilized in achieving specific and very targeted functions within an app.
So who's sitting around the table on a project kickstart with an in-canvas project?
Normally it'll be the stakeholders, the people who are defining the needs and the people who know what it needs to produce and what it needs to look like. And then often it'll just be the analyst in Canvas, and they'll be wireframing it as the discussion continues along.
I often hear the phrase failing fast or prototyping now. Is in Canvas useful for prototyping?
Hugely so. And it's an approach we often use. It's very iterative. So because of the speed of development, because there's so much that's taken care of, and you can really just work and concentrate and focus on the business logic of an app, what happens, we find very often, is one will develop it, and because it's so quick, it comes very rapidly, send it back to stakeholders, get them to log in, have a play, see how it's working, and then this will give them a further chance to develop and evolve their ideas, and they'll then feed that back, and we'll go through an iterative process. And the final outcome is that people are getting exactly what they want. They've seen it and been engaged all the way through, so they have great ownership of the final solution. And they will adopt it because of how involved they've been in the process and how they've been able to input and feedback throughout. And one of the particular strengths of in-canvas when used in this sort of prototyping is that because the platform is so fundamentally secure, and just the simplest canvas is as secure as the most complex, fully developed app, we can, in a trusted sense, use live, actual, real data right from the start in the very early processes of wireframing or prototyping. And what this means is that it gives users a real connection, and they can actually understand the final output. So one isn't necessarily being confused by sample data, one's actually working with and developing and feeding back based upon the actual data within the system.
How projects work?
Typically we'll find that we'll begin by sitting down with the stakeholders to understand the functional requirements of the particular application. Along with that, we'll also be looking to identify the users of the application so that we can put into place the necessary permissions and structures and hierarchies to support their views of the application. We'll then do a workshop where we feedback this and gather additional thoughts and ideas that are developed as part of the questioning process. Then we'll go away and develop canvases and data structures to form an initial straw man that we then take back to a second workshop. Now here is where the people who we've engaged with can now see what we've been working on. This can often lead to further new ideas coming out or revision of existing ideas. Then this kicks off an iterative process where we'll continue to do this throughout the application development. We'll be working on the application, developing it, improving it, then going back to the users to allow them to see how it's changed, maybe even log in themselves and work with it. And this grows their ideas fundamentally in terms of the application and what it finally needs to look like. What we find is this really gives buy-in, and people have, throughout the process, been able to contribute. And it means that when the final solution is then delivered, they're very happy with it because of the involvement they've had and the way that they've been able to tailor it to their specific vision for this particular application.
Andrew, I've heard it said before that sometimes 60% of an application development can be software integrations, testing, tuning. How does in-canvas help to reduce those overheads?
In-canvas reduces those overheads by just so limiting the portion that does actually need to be tested in the first place. You've got so much around the security, the data sources that are there already and supported by the platform. So what it means is that for any given application that's being developed, the piece that requires testing is purely that functional core that has been developed for that specific application. So, and that testing is equivalent to the user acceptance testing effectively, where you're validating more the thought processes and the logic that the application is producing versus any technical testing around specifics of a data source or security or anything like that. All of that is taken care of. It's just that core functionality of an app that needs to be reviewed.
How does that help the reliability of the code?
Effectively, it means that any given app can almost be codeless. So it's not that there's any issues with the reliability. All it is it's more a case of, I'm actually showing the wrong column from the database. It's that kind of mistake being made. It's not, our code isn't working in this way or that way. The problems that you encounter are just very basic and very fundamental, and it's more about how the application is working rather than any specific detailed code that needs to be reviewed.